Good afternoon. You have entered the zone of high strangeness, a place where the unbelievable is believed until proven otherwise. I am your host, Gary Wheeler, and this is a beautiful day in Rockland, although a bit cloudy, I'm afraid to say. But indications that spring is definitely here. Fortunately for all of us, I think that can be said. This afternoon we'll be taking callers. Again, callers who are interested in this subject of UFOs or the presence of ETs here on Earth, and especially if you have an experience of any sort, or you know somebody that does, or you just have an opinion and would like to express it. You can either use first names only or choose to be anonymous is fine as well. The number here at the station is 207-593-0013. Again, 207-593-0013. And to that point, last Sunday, we had a very interesting caller. And normally I record the radio show so I can put it on the archives on YouTube for people to listen to at a different time. And unfortunately, last week, I pushed the button, but apparently I didn't push it hard enough, and the show is not recorded. So I didn't get that good caller. And I would like you, if any of you out there happen to record that show, I'd appreciate it if you'd give me a shout out. You can email me at gwnews, the number 2, gwnews2 at yahoo.com, or you could call me and leave a message at 207-596-0495. That would be greatly appreciated. I'd like to get it up on the archives. Okay, a little FYI as usual. Again, reminding you that there's a very heavy-duty UFO conference in California, and from May 25th to the 31st, and this is at Joshua Tree Park in California. Beautiful place in the desert, and a noted place for UFO sightings as well. All the heavy duties will be there, and it goes on for a week, and it's going to just be full of information and a great place to meet fellow ufologists and learn a lot, I assume, and enjoy some very warm weather as well, I believe. Also, a little reminder about your digital cameras, as always. You're out there taking pictures. You got the sky in the picture. Take a close look when you print it on your computer. And that camera has the ability to pick up some infrared and ultraviolet frequencies that we don't see with our eye. And sometimes you pick up images in the sky that you did not see. And those images could well be a UFO. So take note. Take a moment to thank my sponsors, Diverse Landscapes here in Rockland, and Eric Best, who's an author and business consultant and a good friend. And a reminder that you're listening to WRFR 93.3 FM in Rockland and 99.3 in Camden, and streaming at WRFR.org. Well, this afternoon I have a continuation of the Stanton Friedman interview that we started last week. The interview is by the organization called Dark Journalists, who do a lot of UFO interviews of ufologists in the field, and this is a particularly good interview because Stanton Friedman is probably one of the grandfathers of the whole UFO movement in the research, and he's also a nuclear physicist. So during those years he worked in that capacity, he was very familiar with the government and their whole way in which they had top secret classifications, which he had, and how that works within the government. And he explains it and helps us understand better why people, even who have top secret clearance, don't necessarily know about the whole UFO cover-up. So we will continue with that. And again, this is Stanton Friedman, and this is the continuation of his interview. Okay, I'll begin now.
Well, do you think there are covert intelligence groups that are trying to, over time, discredit the MJ-12 documents and reverse the research on this to try and keep the public uninformed about UFOs?
Oh, yeah. It would be standard operating procedure. If something gets out that risks releasing classified data, you want to put out disinformation. The British did it all during the war. They turned certain German agents. And how important it is can be illustrated by the fact that we made a major effort to convince Hitler that the invasion of Europe, which everybody knew was going to happen sometime, was going to take place near Calais, France, rather than Normandy.
Right,
yeah. They even included documents, sort of innocuous, in the pocket of an English officer who had died. They dumped him off Spain, man without a face, and knowing that the Spanish would turn it over to Hitler. All kinds of subtle things.
That's interesting.
Well, if you want it, being able to deceive your enemy is extremely important when you have a limited amount of troops, equipment, capability, and stuff. Hitler's generals told them, bring in the reserves. Come on, they're attacking over here. No, said Hitler. He knew better. This is not the real attack. That's going to happen over at Calais. The time he sent in the troops, it was too late.
Yeah.
So we've learned that this information can be very powerful.
Absolutely.
And, that's the way things are. I mean, people say, oh, that's terrible. Government's lying. Well, I hate to say it, yeah, governments do lie.
Yeah.
This isn't the first time.
Right. Well, what world have they been living in?
Yeah.
Well, when you look at the secretive system that's been set up around this kind of information, what is their chief reason for these attempts at discrediting the whole notion of MJ-12? Would it be to lower the public's knowledge about UFO phenomena because they want to reserve that information and all that it implies and keep it for themselves, basically?
Well, I think they want it to themselves, and they're concerned about our enemies overseas, too.
Okay.
And people say, well, don't you think we're entitled to know everything? No, I don't. I respect security.
Uh-huh.
And if we put our stuff out on the table and the Russians and Chinese don't put their stuff, maybe what they know with what we know would give them a leg up on us.
Interesting.
You can't do that.
And these other countries, like Russia and China, for example, have their own UFO files and secret research programs around it as well, right?
Oh, a great deal. Big countries. And loads of sightings over there in both China and Russia. And, India as well. The problem is what happens to the world if countries lose their special status.
Yeah.
If there's a push for, why don't we be friends with each other, folks? We got a lot of starving kids to feed. To me, that's a symbol of what's wrong with the planet.
Yes.
And I can't imagine aliens thinking that, those Earthlings are really nice guys. We're not.
Oh, there's no question. And it's funny, you do hear this a lot, that if the aliens were visiting, well, why wouldn't they speak to us officially? And I recall someone asked you that on one of these CNN debates, and you had a classic response. You said, well, I don't talk to the squirrels in my backyard, which I
That's right. Good. It's right. And, it sounds simplistic, but it's true. When you look at the huge investment, as I mentioned, the total black budget for military intelligence for the United States, according to the Washington Post, is $52.6 billion.
Wow, and that's just what we know about, right?
Yeah, that's black budget according to them, and I think there was a leak from Snowden about budget or something like that. But if back 25 years ago, it was almost $40 billion. The guy got a Pulitzer Prize for coming up with that number about the black budget. So this is taken very seriously.
Yeah.
Classified intelligence. It doesn't mean everybody gets to look at it, but nobody gets to take it home. It means you don't get to look at it. You don't have access. And that includes, the cosmic Watergate is why I call it that, because that wasn't even military secrets.
True.
But the Washington Post spent a lot of money to dig into that. And we need somebody to take Woodward Bernstein's place to blow the lid off the cosmic Watergate, as far as I'm concerned. I'd help.
Yeah, right. Well, you've been the best help so far. Stan, when you look at things like WikiLeaks and stuff, do you look at it hopefully and say maybe somewhere in that whole sort of milieu of stuff we're going to see some UFO revelations?
I'm not too optimistic about that. Compartmentalization is the key to security. That's why I mentioned Vannevar Bush. He was known for that.
Uh-huh.
Just because you work in the same building and have a top secret clearance doesn't mean you have access to what the guy next door is doing.
True.
That's how you. That means if you got a spy in your midst, he doesn't have access to everything, you see.
Yes.
Which is very important. And, I talk about spies and military budgets, but look at the planet we live on. Where does the money go? Everybody's got an Air Force. Everybody's got an Air Defense Command. Everybody's got armies, navies. Huge amounts of money.
Yeah.
You got to protect your information. And so, it's a sad thing to say, but that's where the action is.
And so that could include this sort of press blackout, working through the media to keep it as a kind of third rail.
Yes.
Yeah, as something to report on seriously.
Yes. I think the government, when I say the government, that makes it sound like it's a monolithic structure and everybody knows what's going on.
Right.
That's not how security works.
Okay.
Only a few people know what's going on.
Yeah.
If you take advantage of the egos in Washington, well, if that were happening here, I'm important, I would know about it. No. That's the best reason for not telling you. You might be talking to the press.
I see what you mean.
Why don't presidents know everything that's going on? Why should they? They don't have a need to know, and they do meet the press all the time. It's part of their daily. They might be saying some wrong things.
Right.
Presidents come and go. Intelligence agencies go on forever. That's an old line out of Washington. So, like it or not, we don't get to vote on whether we like it or not.
Well, that's definitely true. Now, do you think that most of this advanced technology research from these crash retrievals has been transferred over to private industry, which has the effect of making it even harder to trace?
Well, look, if it's technology research, who's going to develop it? Some university? No, it's going to be private industry. Like I said, look at Lockheed for stealth.
Yeah, right.
And the rockets, you might have a NASA hither and yon, but the work gets done in industry. Who builds the boosters? It's industry.
Sure.
And so they're an important part of the thing. You'd never get academics to admit that. I've seen so much ignorance. Well, two different people have told me, Stan, if Roswell really happened, they'd have had to pull half the physicists out of the colleges in the country to deal with that. And I laughed and said, what are you talking about? Are you forgetting about Los Alamos and Sandia and Livermore and Oak Ridge and all these other places? There are two requirements. You need competent people who have high-level security clearances. And we have that in industry and the national labs. That's where the action is, not at universities. I'm not saying universities, MIT is still doing some classified work, a small amount by comparison.
But most of them would be out of the loop on this for sure. Definitely. It's such a naive point of view that they have.
Well, it would have been published in the Physical Review. I had one guy tell me about Roswell. I mean, the first nuclear chain reaction, Fermi's output at Chicago, 1942. It was an earth-shaking event.
Yeah.
There was publication about it.
Well, that reminds me, I seem to recall you were in a radio interview and someone called in and said, I was in the military and I never heard about a crashed UFO. And you said, well, why would they share that with you? Did you have top secret crash retrieval security clearance? And that really said a lot, I think.
Security clearance and need to know.
Need to know, exactly.
You need both. Some people think that everybody who's got a top secret clearance has access to all top secret material. No way.
Right.
That's not the way it works.
Well, it's very interesting. Actually, there's a lot of misconceptions about how secrecy is maintained by these organizations, and it's important to open our eyes and see how things really work. Now I want to ask you what, in your opinion, are the three most important UFO cases on the record that prove we're being visited by an extraterrestrial presence. What are your top three? And let's say besides Roswell, since you've already shown just how important that case is in your best-selling books on the subject. So what are your top three?
Well, I like the Betty and Barney Hill case, mainly because Dr. Simon was so skilled. We hear a lot about PTSD these days.
Sure.
He was a world-class expert on that. He actually ran an Army facility with 3,000 beds for veterans who had shell shock, is what they called it then.
Right.
PTSD. And he developed the techniques for getting them back to life, so to speak. And he said, he didn't know much about flying saucers at all, but he knew a great deal about having people get over traumatic experiences. And he had to stop one session each for Betty and Barney because he wasn't sure they could handle it. The terror was so obviously great.
Yeah.
And so coming from him, that means something. We're not talking about a parlor hypnotist. That, along with the fact that Betty and Barney were rather special people, in my opinion. I did meet them both.
Oh, that's right, you did.
Oh, yeah, of course. And the co-author on Capture, Kathleen Martin, is Betty's niece.
Yes, she's a good writer.
So she heard about it the day after it happened because Betty called her sister, Kathy's mother, and told her about seeing a flying saucer. Now, the abduction part didn't come out for a couple of years.
Yes.
That's where Dr. Simon got involved. But I was the first to publish about the star map work.
Uh-huh.
You want a different sense of perspective. The base stars for the Hill aliens, if you will, Zeta 1 and Zeta 2 reticulum.
Right, yeah.
So what? Well, they're only 39.3 light years away, which is close down the street, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
But they're only an eighth of a light year apart from each other.
Ah.
So from a planet around one looking at the other, you can see it all day long. That's an entirely different situation. They're 30 times closer than we are. Our star is the next star over.
Huh.
So, and they're older. So it wouldn't be surprising if there were earlier interstellar travel when you had a next door neighbor.
Right.
So that's kind of intriguing.
And the upshot of the star map is that Betty Hill recounted it during a hypnotic regression and drew it. And it actually took another 5 years for information on that second star to even be published.
Well, Marjorie Fish, a brilliant woman, I was the first to publish about her work, built more than 20 three-dimensional models of our local galactic neighborhood.
Amazing.
Using little beads and string to see if she could match the two-dimensional drawing that Betty had made. Only if she could remember it accurately. That was a kicker from Dr. Simon.
Yeah.
And so she finally kept eliminating stars and finally found one pattern that matched, angle for angle, line length for line length. It was a great day. And that's when we found out it was Zeta 1 and Zeta 2 reticuli.
Yeah, let's go to this clip from your original classic, UFOs Are Real documentary. Now, this is Betty Hill describing how she was shown the star map during her original UFO encounter.
When I asked the leader where he was from, I said, I know you're not from this planet. And this is when I saw the star map. It looked almost like I was looking out a window. It had dimension to it. It was about 3 or 4 feet long and about 2 feet high. There were all these balls of light in it. And the leader explained to me that the heavy lines, the places they go all the time or frequently, the broken lines were expeditions. He asked me if I knew where I was on the map. And I told him no, that I knew nothing about astronomy. And so he said if I did not know where I was on the map, then there was no point of trying to explain it to me. I just didn't have the necessary knowledge.
That's so interesting. And here's Betty Hill, right? This no-nonsense social worker and her husband, Barney, who's a postal worker. And they have this incredible encounter together and can back each other's story up. And then the info about the star map given under hypnosis that's later proven correct. I mean, you have to feel bad for the skeptics on this.
Yeah.
So I definitely agree. That's one of the all-time best cases. What other cases are your top favorites?
Let's see. So the Hill case, Roswell, I like Jim McDonald's testimony before Congress. He's got 40-some cases. But One I like, the RB-47 case, for example,
Okay.
where a reconnaissance bomber, RB, highly trained people with fancy equipment over the Gulf of Mexico. A UFO approached, flew around them a couple times. They radioed the ground. They saw it on their radar. The ground people saw it on their radar. And this went on for almost an hour. And Jim McDonald, he found the sighting in the Air Force files, pretty much neglected, and managed to talk to all the crew members on board the plane. I think it was 6. And outstanding case. And I talked to Carl Sagan about it. Oh, well, that was, I know what that was, Stan. We were classmates at Chicago.
Oh, really? That's interesting.
Yeah, 3 years in the same classes. That was spoofing. That is where you create a target on a radar screen without there being anything there. You do it electronically. I said, Carl, there were visual observations. Oh, well, I better think about that again. I never heard any more about it.
No follow-up.
That was a good case.
Well, I always had the impression that Sagan knew a lot more than he talked about, but he just didn't have the guts to go there.
If he did know, it was because of security restrictions. I saw him a year before he died at his home. And we talked about clearances, and he had a clearance for the O'Brien panel.
Uh-huh.
And I had the feeling that Carl knew something, but not a lot, because he had been arrested, as a matter of fact, for protesting and the bomb testing and stuff like that.
Oh, that's intriguing.
A better bet, from my view, this will surprise you, Frank Drake, the SETI man. Why do I say that? Because he got his undergraduate degree, went into the Navy, and worked on anti-missile kind of stuff, efforts to break through the other guy's codes and stuff like that. Had to have a high level of clearance for that. And he stayed in the reserve for at least 10 years. And he served, the commander of the Navy Reserve Unit in Cambridge was Donald Menzel.
Wow. Well, there's your tie-in right there.
Yeah. And so I like Frank as a better bet for that. In other words, I think the way you do this is you program people to confuse, to misrepresent, to misdirect. And I think SETI has done a great job of that. In other words, maybe they should learn sign language instead of waiting for signals from outer space.
Right. Yeah. Maybe the aliens will send it on a cassette.
Yes, as a matter of So that's just off the top. I've never talked to Frank. I've talked to Carl. But it would be interesting to find out more.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And someone like Sagan, whose work was so fascinating, you just know that there were certain secrets about all this that he would be expected to keep. I guess the point is just that you'd wish that some of these really big names would have gone that extra mile and informed the public on this, you know?
Well, look, he said something twice. There are interesting sightings that aren't reliable. There are reliable sightings that aren't interesting, but there are no interesting and reliable sightings. That's totally false. Biggest study ever done for the Air Force found the greater the reliability of the sighting, the more likely to be unexplainable.
Yeah.
And as an example of government attitude, a statement was made by the Secretary of the Air Force about that report, Blue Book Special Report number 14, that on the basis of this study, we believe no objects such as those properly described as flying saucers have overflown the United States. Even the unknown 3% could have been identified as conventional phenomena or illusions if more complete observational data had been available. Well, the report, it was 21.5%. Completely separate from the 9.3% that were listed as insufficient information.
So that's 30% or more.
Well, yeah. Give me 20. I'll take 20.
Well, we'll do 25% and split the difference. But they're always doing this in these types of studies, right? Cooking the figures.
It was a lie. And as a matter of fact, the press release, this is 1955, and I talk about it in Flying Saucers and Science.
Mm-hmm.
The press release was strange. It didn't give the title of the report, surely some newsman would have said, what do you mean report 14? What happened to 1 through 13? Oh, they were all classified. Couldn't do that. It didn't say who did the work. Battelle Memorial Institute in Columbus, Ohio, a major research and development firm. They didn't say that. So nobody could go there and say, hey, what'd you guys do here? That kind of thing.
Right.
There was a cross comparison between the unknowns, the only ones we're interested in, and the knowns, based on 6 different characteristics. They found the probability that the unknowns were just missed knowns was less than 1%.
Wow.
None of that showed up in any of the press stuff. So there was a flat-out lie. The 3% figure was a flat-out lie. And to say that it was just because there wasn't enough data was a flat-out lie, separate category for that. So that's why I say it's a cosmic Watergate. If we got anybody who's going to take the trouble, it's easy to prove that.
Yeah, well, they obviously this is what their modus operandi is around this topic.
Yes.
No, even now, some 50, 60, 70 years later.
Unfortunately, yes. And, it bothers me as a scientist and as somebody who gets strange questions from people that indicate they clearly have no idea what's going on.
Yeah.
And it's time to get educated, folks.
Definitely true. Now, as far as important modern UFO cases go, the Phoenix Lights incident, where in 1997 multiple witnesses saw these unexplained lights and crafts just sort of hovering over the city. Where do you rank the Phoenix Lights case in your list of UFO sightings?
Well, it was a very good report because there were so many witnesses.
Yeah. And
because the conditions were good. It was a clear sky. They were watching a comet that night. That's why so many people were out. And the Air Force explanation was ridiculous. And I was glad to see Governor Symington.
Fife Symington.
So, yeah. I was on Larry King with him when he went public with saying he saw them. He was a pilot in the Air Force, and sure as heck wasn't in the airplane.
Right, yeah.
Finally had guts enough to come out, So it was a good case. But remember, no bodies.
Right.
No good pictures that we know about.
Yeah.
So as sightings go, it was great. And, the explanation that it was the people running maneuvers, testing flares and stuff, that happened an hour later and 30 miles away, but they got away with it.
Yeah.
The press didn't do their job.
Yeah.
So, but I give Symington credit for speaking out.
Yes, and again, it makes a difference when someone like that will come forward, which brings me to Major Jesse Marcel, who was the retired military intelligence officer that gave you the Roswell story in the first place. Now, I have a couple of clips of Major...
Okay, I'm going to interrupt there just for a moment and remind you that you're listening to the show High Strangeness. I'm Gary Willard, your host, and you're listening to an interview with Stanton Friedman, an interview done by the Dark Journalist. Very fascinating, I think. Stanton Friedman being an expert in many areas and probably one of the most outspoken ufologists out there, and the one who's always called on to debate with the debunkers, which he does extremely well. And again, to remind you, you're listening to WRFR, 93.3 FM in Rockland, and 99.3 in Camden, and streaming on WRFR.org. Again, if there's anybody out there who happened to record last week's show, please get in touch with me. Number is 207-596-0495. Thank you, and here we'll get back to Stanton Friedman.
Marcel discussing the Roswell incident, and then let's come back and talk about your experiences with him. So here we go.
One thing I was certain of, being familiar with all air activities, that it was not a weather balloon, nor an aircraft, nor a missile. It was something else of which we didn't know what it was. There were just fragments strewn all over the area, an area about 3/4 of a mile long and several hundred feet wide. So we proceeded to pick up the parts. A lot of it had a lot of little members with symbols that, to me, I call them hieroglyphics because I could not interpret them, could not be read. They were just like symbols of something that meant something. These little members could not be broken, could not be burned. I even tried to burn that. It would not burn.
It was not anything from this earth that I'm quite sure of. Because I was, being an intelligence officer, I was familiar with just about all materials used in aircraft and in our air travel. This is nothing like that. It could not be. It could not have been.
There he is, the late Jesse Marcel, telling us about observing the debris from a crashed UFO on a ranch outside Roswell, New Mexico. Now, Stan, what was it like when you met him? Can you tell us about some of those early conversations and some of your first impressions of this courageous guy who came forward with an amazing story?
He was, well, I met him, first I talked to him on the phone, and then I met him in person for my movie, UFOs Are Real. And he was a really neat guy, the kind of guy you'd sort of inherently trust.
Yeah.
Remember who he was. He was the intelligence officer for the only atomic bombing group in the world, the 509th at Roswell. And he was not a West Pointer.
Huh.
Which means that he was extremely well thought of by the powers that be. You don't get to that position, in other words, just by being someplace for a long time or anything like that.
Yeah.
You got to have talent. There are nuclear weapons involved. And so he was a very nice man, and his son was great, too. His son went on to be a doctor, medical doctor, died last year, unfortunately.
Just incredible guy, yeah.
Yeah, they were both great guys.
Yeah. Jesse Sr., did he actually describe the I-beams to you with the kind of hieroglyphs and the purple tint?
I got more of that from Junior than Senior.
Okay.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, there was a mock I-beam made up based on Jesse Jr.'s.
That's right, I've seen that. Very interesting.
Yeah, yeah.
What was the most important thing that Senior told you? What really stuck in your mind? I mean, I know the whole story is incredible, but was there one thing that just grabbed you?
Well, it was interesting that he was told to shut up by General Ramey
Right.
when he was there, but you don't say anything, I'll take care of it.
Yeah.
That's a rather, you follow orders. I mean, why didn't he speak up? What are you, crazy? This is the military, a chain of command, especially for an outfit like the 509. So that was one thing. And then the fact that in our first conversation, he told me that what was amazing was that this stuff, there wasn't anything conventional out there when they got out there in this field, in the middle of nowhere. And that's really nowhere. I've been out.
Yeah.
But how much material there was and how big an area it was spread over, like 3/4 of a mile this way, 1/4 mile that way, and no crater. He said, I've seen airplane crashes when he was serving in the Pacific.
Right.
You see vacuum tubes, you see wire, you see all kinds of little tags that say made in Oshkosh, you see all kinds of stuff.
Right, yeah.
There was nothing like that. And there were no craters. So he felt there had to be a mid-air collision.
Yeah.
Now, he didn't know that I'd heard about, later, about the plains of San Augustine. Same time.
Mm-hmm.
And I asked an Air Force general retired, when you have a mid-air collision, is the damage usually symmetric? He said, no. Usually one guy makes it and one guy doesn't.
Ah.
And so one came down intact and this one blew up. And how could it happen? Well, for those who want a possible hypothesis, we know that there was a missile launch scheduled. And at that time, it was only vacuum tube radar. So you leave the radar on so it doesn't need to warm up.
Yes.
It's just sending a beam out. It's not a beam going around and around.
Okay.
And so how many places on the planet would you have to go through a radar beam? Practically none at that time.
Yeah, right.
You kill a few birds. No big deal. So if they happen to, a pilot and a wingman, and more than 40% of the sightings in 47 involve more than one object seen at a time. That's why I say pilot and wingman. We fly that
We're
way.
talking about alien pilot and alien wingman.
Yeah, right. And so you, if you fly through this unexpected beam, and it discombobulates the guidance system, the control system, just for a moment, you might go wham. And then you got a problem.
Oh, yeah.
And people say, how could advanced technology crash? Well, you run into the unexpected. We lost a couple of shuttles, didn't we?
Right, right.
Big, expensive, protected vehicles, but they went down. Unfortunately.
So the scenario is, as you've researched it, that there were two objects. One of them crashed there on Mac Brazel's ranch near Roswell, and the second one came down at a completely different location close by.
The Brazel Ranch is considered the Corona thing. And the other one came out in the plains of San Agustin, out near the very large array radio telescope, which is there now. It wasn't there then.
Okay.
Talked to the rancher who owned the land, and talked to people who were there. And the thing about both those places is relatively easy to cover things up because there's nobody there.
Yeah.
There's no tourists going by.
Right.
You know, also, security was a part of the life of people there. Remember, that's where we were testing to capture German V-2s.
That's interesting.
We had 2 of the 3 nuclear weapons labs there in New Mexico. Kirtland was there. Kirtland Air Force Base, which had all kinds of classified activity going on. There's Roswell down there, the home of the only atomic bombing group in the world.
That's pretty significant. Absolutely.
Yeah. And where security was a day-to-day concern. Matter of fact, when the rancher came in, Bill Brazel, or Mac Brazel, came into the sheriff's office, the sheriff immediately called the base because it was his duty to do so. Anything that might impact on the base, he was to, whether it's a drunken airman having an accident.
Oh, yeah.
Whatever. Well, good public relations was important. Colonel Blanchard, the base commander, instructed Jesse to take one of their counterintelligence corps guys with them. They were going to follow the rancher out because no way to tell anybody how to get there.
Yeah.
3 blocks this way, 5 blocks that way. Doesn't cut it out in the middle of nowhere.
Right.
And the reason the counterintelligence corps guy was there is Blanchard was concerned about somebody spying on him.
Sure.
And so was the concern. And incidentally, I've had some people say, oh, Blanchard was a loose cannon. He got 4 more promotions after that.
Yeah.
He was a 4-star general and vice chief of staff of the United States Air Force when he died of a massive heart attack in the mid-60s. Not small potatoes. And if he hadn't done the right thing back then, he wouldn't have had those 4 promotions.
Right. For sure. Yeah.
He was West Pointer, of course. So I get people, I've had the noisy negativists saying crazy things like, I had one guy, one of the anti-UFO people saying that, an unknown PR guy put out and...
Is this Joe Nickel?
Yeah.
Unbelievable. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah.
Well, so what did he say?
He put out, he said, an anonymous PR guy put out an unauthorized press release. Even after we'd done a program, which I pointed out, I know his name, I'd had dinner with him, I'd been in his home and stuff, and if he had read any of the books, he would have known that.
Right.
Walter Hout.
Walter Hout, yeah. Who put out the original story over that the newspapers picked up about a saucer crashing at Brazel's ranch.
On the instructions of Colonel Blanchard.
Amazing. No, it's great. So the thing I know, Joe Nickel and Shermer both really don't seem to know anything about the topic that they explore. You mentioned something about the Flatwoods monster case, which is fascinating.
Joe Nickel,
yeah,
on that one. I love his explanation. I've been to Flatwoods. I spent a lot of time with Frank Fascino, who wrote the definitive book about Flatwoods.
Yeah,
he's got relatives living in the area. He made a number of trips there. Now, Joe Nickel had an explanation. He went there once, didn't talk to any of the witnesses, which were still alive at the time, didn't visit the site on a hillside, and came up with an explanation. It was a 6-foot owl.
There you go.
Honest to God. Now, I've talked to a lot of people down there. Nobody tells me about 6-foot owls down there, not even 3 feet.
Well, that's so ridiculous. Well, why don't you go ahead and tell us what Joe Nickel's former profession was before he became this Mr. Debunker guy?
He was a magician. all kinds of stuff like that. Now, why this qualifies him to make statements about scientific subjects, I don't know. But look, even Michael Shermer has a degree in physics, but he didn't work as a physicist. When we debated on Coast to Coast Radio, the audience voted afterward.
Yeah.
I got 80% of the vote. He got 20%.
Yeah, right.
He didn't know anything about the subject.
Yeah.
He hadn't done his homework. At least when Seth Shostak was on, we debated. I got 57%. He got 33%, and 10% said, I don't know who won. But Shermer he started off with a typical example of the nasty, noisy negativist. He was asked, what did he think about this whole UFO stuff? And, well, it's like all those other paranormal subjects, was the answer. You have a residue effect. Cases, 5% of the cases, you don't have enough data for. So, of course, you can't explain it. And I leaped in like with a Mack truck. Well, I said, and I gave several examples. One, Blue Book Special Report 14, 21.5% of the cases, not 5%, could not be identified.
Right.
The Condon Report, according to a special UFO subcommittee, the world's largest group of space scientists, the American Institute of Aeronautics and Astronautics, 30% of the 117 cases studied in detail could not be identified. In Richard Hall's The UFO Evidence, 18% of the cases, and I rattled off a couple of more, and it was downhill there for him. Why did he make the statements he made? They sounded good, I guess, to him.
Yeah.
There are 4 basic rules for debunkers.
Okay.
What the public doesn't know, I'm not going to tell them. But if you can't attack the data, attack the people.
Right.
Do your research by proclamation, not by investigation.
Okay.
And there's another one which I forgot. I'm getting old, and I got to stop doing this.
Now, those 3 are really the important ones. Don't bother me with the facts. My mind is made up.
That's okay. Don't bother me with the facts. My mind's made up.
Yes, exactly. Well, it's that myopic viewpoint that says nothing will get me outside of my information comfort zone.
Yeah.
And you make an excellent distinction about this, that they're not actual skeptics in the true sense of the term. They're debunkers, which is a big difference.
Yeah. A skeptic says, I don't know. The debunker says, I do know. There's nothing to this.
Right, exactly.
That's a difference. It's a big difference.
Well, Stan, when you see this kind of professional intimidation that's practiced at institutions and universities, what can you say to the emerging researcher who's dedicated in the field of UFO study? What kind of advice and encouragement do you have for them? I'm
calling on all who are listening. I've given over 700 lectures. I come on very, very strong that some UFOs are alien spacecraft. We're dealing with a cosmic Watergate. There are no good arguments against those 2 conclusions. And this is the biggest story of the millennium. That's coming on pretty strong.
Sure.
I've had 11 hecklers, 2 of whom were drunk. And over 700 lectures in 50 states, 10 provinces, 18 other countries. I've answered, I once figured, over 50,000 questions. And, it's okay have facts in hand before putting mouth in gear.
Right.
I mean, there are some rules of the game,
Yeah.
But it's amazing. At the end of my lectures, I often ask, how many people here believe they've seen what I would consider to be a flying saucer? All flying saucer UFOs, very few UFOs are flying saucers.
Yeah.
Most isotopes aren't fissionable. Fortunately for us nuclear guys, some are.
Right.
You got to look in the right direction, so to speak.
Yeah.
And when I ask how many people here have seen a UFO, having defined my terms earlier, just raise your hand and I'll just point and count. And the hands go up hesitantly. They trust me, but
Right.
and I point and count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. By the time I get over here, the hands go up vigorously. Typically, 10% of the audience believes they've seen one. And then I ask, how many of you reported what you saw? 90% of the hands go down.
Oh, yeah.
So that's the difficulty, in other words. It's not that there aren't sightings. I get people saying, even now I get notes, how come I haven't heard about any sightings recently? Well, MUFON, Mutual UFO Network, gets over 700 reports a month.
Yeah.
A month.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to encourage people. There are more than a dozen PhD theses that have been done, but professors are scared to stick their neck out entirely. They'll take away my tenure.
I see,
Silly
yeah.
things like that. So what I'm saying is the biggest tool in the debunker's armory is ridicule.
Yeah.
And that gets in the way. And fortunately, we're at a point in time where things are changing because of Kepler.
Mm-hmm.
If I had told you 60 years ago that, well, you know, there are planets all over the place, and surely we're not the only ones, people would have laughed their heads off.
Right.
Frank Drake of the SETI movement, SETI, silly effort to investigate, I say it stands for Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence. He was saying a few years back there might be as many as 8,000 people places in the galaxy where they could send signals, from which they could send signals. And today a good number might be 8 billion.
Yes.
So our specialness is shrunk just a bit.
Yes, absolutely.
But Menzel was saying, and he knew better, even forgetting the MJ-12 stuff, to talk about hundreds of light years makes no sense.
Right.
Because we know how many stars there are in the neighborhood, you know. And so we have reached a special point now. We have joined the club, if you will, where we come to realize that the major source of energy in the universe is nuclear fusion.
Uh-huh.
Nuclear fusion. That's what goes on in the stars. Well, it turns out you can use fusion for propulsion. I worked on a study as early as 1962 on fusion for interstellar travel. If we use the right stuff in the right way and kick particles off the back end of a rock that have 10 million times as much energy per particle as they can get in a dumb old chemical rocket.
Yes.
A million times. Now the stars are within reach. Of course, we Earthlings aren't going to use it for that. We're going to use it to kill people. And people don't realize we have exploded 2,000 nuclear weapons on this planet. Only 2 against people. Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Thank goodness.
Yep.
But from an alien viewpoint, we're a primitive society whose major activity is tribal warfare. We like killing each other.
Yeah.
In World War II, we killed 50 million of our own kind. 50 million. I don't think the kids get taught this in school, frankly.
Mm.
We destroyed 1,700 cities. We're not nice guys.
Right.
I get people saying, why don't the aliens just land and say hi on the White House lawn, you know?
Yeah, oh yeah.
We're not friendly beings. It's a no-fly zone in the first place, the White House.
Yeah, right.
But every government would love to get its mitts on a flying saucer.
And based on your research, you're convinced that we have.
Well, of course I think they have.
Yeah.
Roswell, Aztec, there are other ones.
Yes. So they just go into that just a little bit. If they capture, they kind of do a crash retrieval. They hear about a crash. They have a special team that will go out and get one of these things.
Certainly.
Yeah.
And people say, well, come on, Stan, what are they doing that for? I say, well, anytime there is classified material being moved from one place to another, there is paperwork in case something crashes. I had to carry my own slides for a presentation at a classified meeting because the slide people were a little late. So I had the right clearance. I developed the information. But I get called in, and when do your flights leave? We're going to be keeping tabs on you. This goes in your briefcase. It doesn't get separated from you. You don't put it in the trunk of the car. They scare the heck out of you.
Oh, yeah.
And if your car crashes, we will have people there. We don't care about you. We care about the classified material. I was so glad to get rid of that stuff. You won't believe.
Oh, I can only imagine.
So when you think of all of the nuclear weapons that are moved from place to place, you have to have retrieval times. And one time they were used, teams, was Cosmos 954, a Soviet satellite, which had a nuclear reactor on board to produce the electrical power. The Russians launched 33, 34 of these. The United States only one. They were way ahead of us. compact nuclear systems about this big
Uh-huh.
for use in space. And it crashed in northern Canada, near Great Slave Lake. And there was a team up there within very short order, and they scoured over 100,000 square kilometers looking for wreckage. Of course, it was radioactive, so that made it a little easier. You could do it from the air and so forth. But there was a retrieval team there ready to go. This isn't surprising when you think about it. And back engineering is an old business.
Mm-hmm.
During the war, if an American plane crashed in Germany, the Germans were looking at the wreckage.
Yeah.
And if a German one crashed in England, we were looking at the wreckage.
For sure.
To see what materials are they using? What can we learn? And it's a game that's as old as, bigger shields, stronger spears, whatever. What are these guys making their spears out of?
Yeah. Well, if you were to guess, in a sense, based on all your research, what do you think that they have re-engineered in terms of the technology at this point?
I think we've learned a lot. But, people say, well, if you got a crash saucer, why aren't you flying saucers? Well, think about it. If you went to Christopher Columbus in 1493, hey, great job, Chris. Got a little project for you. I got 2 nuclear submarines here and unlimited money. I'd like you to build me another one. Could he have? Not the slightest chance in the world.
Right.
If you gave this cheap digital wristwatch, the smartest people on the planet, the year I was born, 1934, could they have built another one? Not a chance. I mean, they know it's a watch. It's got, there's a battery. It's electrically powered.
Yeah.
But they had no way to analyze the chip. And even if they could have, there was no way to duplicate it. Intel spends $1 billion on a new chip facility,
Right.
So it sounds easy, but it isn't. Now, I think we've learned a number of different things.
Okay.
I get a kick out of, in my book, in Flying Saucers and Science, there's a picture of me with the Apollo 12 command module.
Right.
And on it. It's a round, blunt body.
Yeah.
And when I was growing up, everybody thought a high-speed craft in the atmosphere has to be like the X-15. Pointy nose, sharp wings, highly streamlined.
Mm-hmm.
Here you got a dumb old blunt body. It looks much more like a saucer than like your old notion.
Right.
Well, I think once I found out that we'd run wind tunnel tests in the late 1947 on round craft.
Oh, really?
I'll bet I know where that idea came.
Yeah, interesting.
And another example, I used to do a weekly science commentary for CBC Radio up here in Fredericton, New Brunswick. All kinds of topics, including UFOs. Did it for 5 years. It was fun.
Great.
And I was reading an article about new and better permanent magnets, neodymium iron boron. And I had been using as an example of what you would do if you had a crash saucer near Roswell. You'd send out pieces to the best classified labs, not to any university, to the best classified labs, Oak Ridge, Los Alamos, Hanford, places like that. What is this stuff? And the guy would tell you, I don't know where you got it, because he didn't have a need to know, you understand.
Yes, exactly.
It's a combination of samarium and cobalt. Why would anybody put those two together? Not your problem. You send it out to other people, measure the electrical, magnetic, thermal properties of this stuff. There are lots of little pieces. And it comes back to you and says, gee, I don't know what this stuff is. It's got the highest magnetic moment of any material I've ever measured. Great permanent magnet. And that's what was used in ghetto blasters, as a matter of fact.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
More magnetic strength and small space for the speakers.
Right.
Well, I'm reading this article, and I'm going to do a program on the new, better permanent magnet material, neodymium iron boron. These are real. I'm not making these up.
Okay.
And at the end of the article, it says, the original work on samarium cobalt was done at Wright Air Development Center in Ohio. That's Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. That's for the wreckage from
That's
Roswell.
where the wreckage went. Yeah.
So I'll bet you, I just laughed. But I know where that idea came
You can tie those two right together.
Yeah, and the thing is that you learn things. And the thing that's most certain to have you accomplish your goal in an advanced research and development program is knowing what you're trying to do can be done.
Well, that makes sense. So they do the advanced technology research, and then they're off and running.
Yeah.
Well, one thing that puzzles me about space and modern technology, and I know you've studied the space program for a long time, I wonder why, after all these successful lunar missions and all the hoopla around landing on the moon, that NASA turns around and completely abandons the moon missions. They stop talking about manned missions to Mars and space exploration. I mean, what do you think is the reason for this mysterious lack of action on their part?
Boy, I wish I knew. Everybody I knew in the space program back in the 60s figured we'd have a base on the moon by the end of this century. We certainly would have gone to Mars. I don't know how many times, but at least once.
Uh-huh.
And it was as if, I joke, Nixon said it was because of the money. The money was that we built Apollo 18 and 19. They were built.
Yeah, they had already spent the money on it.
Yeah, and the Navy is going to be out there, whether you're looking for an astronaut coming back in a command module or not. I mean, there's not a lot of extra money associated with that.
Yeah.
One obvious answer is the aliens said, get the heck off our moon. I don't know.
Well, listen, I think that's a really logical assumption, and probably in the final analysis makes the most sense. And again, all that's necessary to believe that would be the understanding that an advanced civilization could travel into our solar system and build some bases on the moon, which would be an excellent vantage point to observe the Earth.
What we're missing, I think, because I get people saying, well, Stan, come on, you're telling me aliens send a craft from another star system and it crashes when it gets here? I said, no, I'm not telling you that at all. What do you mean? Well, think of the nuclear-powered carrier. I'm talking about an Earth excursion module. Between the stars is one technology realm, one problem. How do you get from that star system to this one? And the second is once you reach the atmosphere of a planet, how do you go around?
Okay, I'm going to stop it there for this show, and we'll continue next week with the final part of this interview with Stanton Friedman. I think he's especially fascinating, partly because he has a way of kind of simplifying very complex types of thought around the whole UFO field, which can be, way over our heads at times. And he very much brings it down to earth at a practical level. So we will continue next week with the end of this particular interview. And again, you can reach me by email at gwnews2@yahoo.com. And I want to wish you a good day, and remember to embrace the mystery, and embrace the mystery that is you.